They are my nephews, okay? That's why. I'd like to welcome, please, Alberto Rosende and Diego Rosende.
Thank you guys for coming. We're very excited to unveil the trailer for our documentary that Diego directed.
I want to thank you guys for being here, especially sticking with it for that. It's been a long process, and it's not over. Not even close. So, just want to thank you for being here, and hope you enjoyed the trailer, and we'll be back out afterwards to answer more questions and talk more about it. So, enjoy.
Hello, everybody. To all of you gathered in Paris, government and civil society leaders, faith groups,
We're not talking about serious stuff. We're talking about the lifeblood
system in the world for all of us.
Thank you very much. That all lives matter.
Smile down for our children and grandchildren.
Are you a patriot? Am I a patriot? I'm Diego Felipe, and in the heated election season that was the summer of 2016, I set out on a path of discovery. I grabbed my two best friends and jumped in my parents' old Ford, from pit stops to piss stops, through back roads and over mountain passes, from coast to coast. My goal was to know the whole country for myself, through my lens, all with one question in mind. What does it mean to be American? You coming?
You need to do some service to a society that allows you to disagree. But you owe it to a society that allows you to disagree freely to work for something better.
Seeing your country's potential is the most patriotic thing you can do. It's not being complacent with the way things are. It's understanding that your country is destined for greatness and is capable of better.
Are we really free in America? Hell no. You're free if you feel you're free. If you want to be free, you can be free. In reality, you can do that anywhere. But if you have a weird mind, it's how you feel about it.
For the American dream to happen, like people need to really, stick together and, help each other out.
We were ready before the generation. It's based on love, unity, and a better way.
I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud of myself as an American. I can definitely see why many people would say they're not proud to be an American. I don't think that that's a fault. I think that that's your right to have pride in something, choose when you do. I think that's kind of a right we have as individuals in this country.
To me, that's what America is. The representation of all races, creeds, everything, and us being able to build together to something better.
So yeah, that was the trailer. Short and sweet. Short and sweet. I'm going to bring the poster out so everyone can check it out. We're going to unveil the poster. Diego will do it. So yeah, Diego approached me to do this film the summer before 2016. No, the summer of 2016, right before the election. And he came to me with this idea. He's like, hey, what do I do this summer? What do you mean? I want to do something that will help me in what I want to do with my life. I want to progress as an artist, as a person. I want to do all these things. What would be best for me to do that? I'm like, well, what do you want to do? He's like, well, I'm going to be a filmmaker. He didn't say, well, I want to go. He said, I'm going to be a filmmaker. I was like, okay, so make a film. And then he's like, well, I have this idea. Because everything that's going on right now, I want to talk about this. And I love it. So I was like, hell yeah, how do we do that? He's like, I don't know. So this has been a process of us putting together our first film. Finding out all the questions we didn't know we needed to ask. Finding out the answers to questions that we thought we already knew. And working together as brothers for the first time, professionally. Being like, this is the first of many times, hopefully we get to do this. Diego still wants to work with me. So I'll have Diego bring out the poster, we'll grab a couple chairs, and we'll have the Q&A. Check it out. Anything you want to say about the film first?
I want to thank Fernando for having us.
Yes.
And for the extreme amount of patience he's had with me. So, seriously, really appreciate it. Yeah, I think I'd rather just like open it up to the floor and see what questions they have. And go from there.
Anyone?
Any questions?
So, do you think we have an identity to show, or what's your thinking about that?
Don't want to reveal too much. I'll watch the film. But yeah, let's say I think we do, and I think that identity is to be accepting and also very critical of our country. I would say that is integral within the American identity.
Thanks.
Did you find when you traveled that your identity was really different from the different places that you saw? Like you did, it was just not like a whole American thing. It was pockets of like different locations.
Yes, 100%. For example, in New Orleans, I got to actually stay with some distant family on my father's side, and they were talking about the Cajun culture that they grew up in, and how they would be able to go out and fish and then just sell that fish on the street and stuff like that. And then when I spoke to one of the residents of New Orleans, he talked about how a lot of those people who grew up living like that actually don't even really identify as American. They rather say that they're Cajun or from New Orleans or something like that. So it's actually really interesting being raised feeling such pride for America, yet there's so many people out there in America that don't even really relate to what it is to be American. They actually have a completely different relation to the country as a whole. So, yeah. And then, along with that process, I would say my American identity changed and shifted with the film as it went on. So it's really interesting. And I think I'm still processing what it all means as I go through the film and everything. So.
Do you think your American identity has changed since you left Miami?
Yes. So if you guys don't know, I was born here in South Florida, and then at the age of 16, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I went to high school just outside of D.C. in Northern Virginia. And then since then, I'm going to school in Boston. And I would say 100% because being here, it's very Latin, obviously. I mean, and one of the things that we have in the film is that, relating to Miami, is that everybody says Miami is the center of Latin America, outside of Latin America. And so for me, I always had a very distinct feeling of being American. I always felt that it was very inclusive and very culturally diverse and very Latin, But then going to DC and not being able to find a place to buy, empanadas, it was very different. So, and that formed and shifted too, because the school that I went to was also a school where there were a lot of military children. So it was a lot of pride, a lot of American flags and such like that. So I felt when I moved, I had more of like what it would be to grow up in like suburban America. Even though I was in suburban America, it was a very different place because of the cultural diversity and stuff. So.
After traveling like around the country and making this film, what was like the most important thing to you that you took out of it?
I think it's that we can never be afraid to be too critical of our country, in that we have a great country and it's beautiful for many reasons. But I think the number one reason is that we can be critical without fear. And I think we need to always be open to other opinions, and especially right now, we need to be critical. We need to hold people accountable, whether it's our elected officials or also the citizenry. We need to hold each other accountable as Americans to be that open place that that's accepting and ready to take on, you know, anyone from all over the world that needs help. So.
Were you surprised in how diversified with people's opinions about feeling or how they identify with America?
Yeah, I would say so, because, like I said, there are people who didn't even identify as being American who had lived here their whole lives. So I think when I would ask the question, I was very surprised by, one, people not knowing how to answer. And the question usually I'd ask at the end of the interview was I would, you know, sum it all up by just saying, so, based on everything you've told me, what would you say being American is? And people would usually kind of stutter and not know what to say, because that's a really hard question. I mean, and it's something that's always forming and shifting with each person, with where we move in the country, who we talk to, just in our neighborhoods and stuff like that. So, yeah, I would say I was mostly just shocked that a lot of people, though they came from very different backgrounds and said a lot of different things, the main thing was that they were very frustrated with, I think, the political system and like the political tension that's going on right now. A lot of people, pretty much the majority of people, said they want the country to come together. That was it. Well, and that's the hardest part, I think, about having a country that's so diverse, is that how do we all find that common ground? And that's what I keep saying about being open, is I think that is the common ground, is that we have to accept other people and be open to their opinions. That's where we find that common ground between cultures and different perspectives. So.
And did you grow as you ran into people who probably had a totally different opinion than yours?
Yeah, I would say so, because being there and getting to be in their environment and hang out with them and then ask them about that, about their life there, it opened me up, because usually when you meet someone, it's very surface level. It's very, a lot of the time it's very, you know, party lines or whatever. You talk about those things, but you don't talk about how they got to those conclusions, how they ended up with those opinions. So being able to see how those perspectives were formed really opened me up, because you can't expect someone to see the same way you do when they haven't had the upbringing or been in that environment. So it really, I think it made me a more open person to listening to other people's perspectives rather than just like, no, you're wrong. It's like, okay, but why do you think that way? You know.
How many states did you go to for the film?
Let's see. Drive-through or like stopping?
Like driving through.
Okay, well, we took a route from Miami up to Nashville. So that's 3 states already. Miami. But we stopped in Georgia for a night, and then up to Nashville. Then we went down to New Orleans, then up to Wichita, then down to Austin, Texas. Then, where did we go?
We had to zigzag. We did a total of 11,000 miles about.
Yeah, it
took 78 days.
So we zigzagged across, and then we zigzagged back. So a lot of states. I would say like probably over 25 states for sure. Yeah, coast to coast. I have a question, but let's do pops first. Pops.
You've had 3 summers in a row that have been fairly incredible. From the time you graduated high school to the last summer that you did this past summer, where you spent many weeks in Europe and Northern Africa and all of these other places. Right. Now that you've been around, what would you say would characterize your trip through the States? And how would you contrast that with the other countries that you visited, as far as an semblance of an identity or not?
Great question.
You can go to Pal's question first if you want.
Yeah, I'll think about that one. I'll meditate on it for a second.
When Diego and I were preparing for this, we were preparing in my little room in Bushwick, New York, in Brooklyn. And a woman who lived next to us got mad at like some noise she heard once, so she knocked on the door and we talked to her, and we found out she was an artist in Arizona. And she made a comment that after she said it, Diego looked at me and goes, "This is exactly what we're making this film." and she said that how can you call yourself an American artist if you only exist and live on the periphery of the country? I live in New York, Diego lives in Boston. We've only ever really, for work, been in LA or Miami. DC, even still the East Coast. So how could we do that? So in terms of that question, how do you think seeing the landscape, seeing all of that change, actually seeing the country, how has that influenced you as an artist now, calling yourself an American artist?
Well, I feel more confident saying it. So, but I would say that, like, seeing the country just allows me to better inform my work. So, especially work that I make here in America, I feel like I'm I feel like I'm able to not only reach wider audiences, not only tell broader stories, but create better characters. In the sense that now my perspectives have been broadened and my horizons have been broadened, and that the people can be realer, because I can take more intricate ideas about different people's lives and incorporate them into my work. So, yeah, and like also thematically too. There's a lot more going across the whole U.S. than just LA or just Miami. So I feel that I can tie more into it, I guess, into my future work, just by being informed about what's going on. I guess we can go back to this question. Can you repeat it?
Say again.
Can you repeat part of it? Just like the actual question.
Can you make it like one question?
What was your experience about compare your experience traveling through the U.S. versus traveling in other places like Europe?
So, the U.S. is a lot bigger than just Europe as a whole. So, it's a lot easier to country hop in Europe, and it's a lot easier to get, I feel like, different perspectives outside of your country. But at the same time, in the U.S., it's a lot more intricate. At least that's the way I saw it, is that you can go so much deeper into one idea, because that idea shifts and forms as you travel across or up or down. Whereas in Europe, the countries are a lot smaller. So there's not as much variance within those ideas or within those beliefs or perspectives. Whereas in the US, I mean, Texas is, you know, you go to Texas and they talk about Hill Country, and then they talk about West Texas. And literally they talk about West Texas like it's a different country, because it literally is. And it's incredible when you go into, you know, I guess anthropology, right? The way geography shapes culture, the way geography actually shapes how humans interact. And you can see that. In, like, Texas is the perfect example, and California, and places like that. So you can see those cultural shifts just by geography, let alone by actual space. So, yeah, I would say that just it gets a lot more intricate in the U.S. because, yeah, that's
I have another question. You've had the opportunity to work with many other folks in projects that you've had before, right? And this is your first project really working with your brother. And so question is for both of you, since both of you have that perspective. What have you found about working with each other that's positive, and where has there been points of friction?
Brutal honesty
absolutely.
is the best policy with your brother. So I would say that's the best part, is that you can just like say it, and you know that if we get upset in 5 minutes, there's going to be a callback, and no one stormed off set or quit or told this other guy who said that. You know, it's me and him, and we can be just straight up, and there's no like little passive aggressiveness within the group. I would say between each other, yeah, maybe a little bit, but at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to go talk crap about my brother, you know, like to someone else and create a rift. You know, that doesn't happen. It's very easy to be just completely upfront with issues we're having. So I think that's the best part about working with my brother.
Truthfully, it was inspiring to watch Diego do what he was doing. This adventure that he went on was so... I mean, I remember the first day we put up the map, which was the first photo, and we looked at the country, and that's when I noticed how big it was, because I was like, wait, our car is literally smaller than the pin that's holding the paper. So he has to do all of this. And we were asking a question, like he said, is a very difficult question. But one of the things that I've admired about Diego working with him was that his specificity in looking for what he wanted. And in knowing how to ask it without trying to pull teeth. He let it come out of each person. He was able to do that. But that comes from the specificity of knowing, I think, who you are as an artist. That's also one of the most difficult things to work with. Because of that need for that specificity, that need for, no, this is the way it needs to be. So that would cause friction when Diego said, I need to do this. I'm like, we can't do that. That can't happen. We talked about this. Yeah, but we're in Texas, and it's huge, and this has happened, so we need to do this now. And like he said, the brutal honesty was always very good, because I could be brutally honest if he could, and then I would, most likely I would leave and be like, all right, no, we're not doing that. And then I'd call him back in 5 minutes, be like, all right, I listened, it took 5 minutes, but this is a good idea, but we need to do it in this way. So there's always finding that compromise, which was good. But it all comes from that specificity, that understanding of what you needed, that Diego was very good at. Yes?
How did you find the interviewees? And was there any bias to them? I mean, did you go to a liberal restaurant, a coffee shop or something?
So pretty much every person was just off of recommendations when we get to that city. Or like leading up to that city, we'd be talking to whoever we're staying with, because we stayed with a lot of people that were just like friends of the family or friends of friends, or yo, I know a guy who lives there, let me call him and see if you can get like his crash at his place or whatever, stuff like that. And then when we get there, we'd usually ask them and be like, yo, do you know anyone that you think would be a good option to interview? So yeah, I would say that there's definitely, a lot of the bias I think comes from where we are in the country, not exactly from the person specifically. Just based on you can look at election maps and stuff like that and kind of get an idea of what their opinions are going to be. So I would say it was more like that. But for example, Albuquerque, both interviewees were completely random, picked up off the street. We walked into a store, asked this girl if she wanted to do it, and then she was like, no, but I have a friend who you should interview, and then that's how we got him. And then another dude, it was our day off, and me and Pete just went to a bar, and then we bumped into this dude, started talking to him, and that's how we ended up sitting down with an interview with him. So, yeah, it's mostly just off of friends of friends or recommendations, or in Albuquerque, completely random. So.
What would you do differently now? And what places would you want to go if you didn't get a chance to go?
I would plan a lot more. That's number one. And then I would try that because we hit a lot of the main areas of the U.S. in the sense of the big cities in those regions. I would definitely try and go more outside of cities because, at the end of the day, when you're in a big city, certain opinions kind of revolve there. So I would try and get a more diversity of opinion in that sense by going outside of the cities, but then also I think I would try to also get a more diverse pool of interviewees. I would try and get, like I said, outside of cities, different kinds of jobs, different kinds of lifestyles. So, which I think we did capture a lot, but at the same time, they're still in those cities. So, yeah, I'll try and go more small town and stuff.
How many times you got broke down?
Oh yeah, good question. Zero times actually, breaking down. However, we had this big lump in one of the tires in the middle of the night in the middle of New Mexico. So that was scary. And then we went into a town called Truth or Consequences. So that was scary. And so then we ended up getting the tire fixed and stuff and kept rolling. And then there was a period of 2 days where we would drive, and when you'd hit 70, everything would go and everything would shut off. But the car would still be running, and we'd be like, oh my God. The radio, everything. So we didn't know what was going on. And then finally when we got to Los Angeles, we got it checked out, and it was the
alternator.
What was it?
Alternator.
Alternator, exactly, the alternator. So, the alternator, right? So then we got that fixed, and that ended up taking a while, so we ended up getting stuck in LA for an extra 3 days. We had to push. We got stuck in LA for a couple days. Yeah, and then in LA also, done with LA, got in a car accident too. We came around this bend. I wasn't in the car, fortunately, and then it stopped, and then the person behind us just didn't stop. boom. And then we had the big Ford truck, so their car was totaled. Our car kept moving, like not even a scratch. We're like, oh, that sucks, man. Hope you're okay. So we just like, you gotta keep going. So I think that's pretty much it. I think it was just the altimeter and then the tire.
Okay, so before you started, right, did you have a preconceived, I guess, thought about the identity? And if you did, how many times that thought changed throughout the process?
I think I definitely did, based on, sad to say, based on like stereotypes of where we were in the country. So, when we were in Texas, I expected to get some country guy, super conservative, that whole thing, but it ended up being quite the opposite because we ended up stopping in Austin, which is an extremely liberal city within Texas, and then, we ended up interviewing someone who was very active in their community and protests and stuff like that, and that was Zoe. I don't know if the one who's like, you have to be critical of the country, and it's very patriotic to do that. So I would say it was times like that where, you go to a certain part of the country and you expect certain answers, and then you get completely different ones. Like, also in Nashville, we interviewed a cantor at a synagogue. So, and, we expected to hear stories of, some kind of prejudice and stuff like that. And she was like, no, I've obviously been completely comfortable here the whole time I've lived here. She's lived there for over 20 years. So it's like things like that where it's more like, you hear so much about the bad. And there is a lot of bad. And like you said, we have to be critical. And we have to make sure to hold people accountable. But at the same time, there's so much good out there. And there are so many good people. It's a small fraction that I feel are actually, doing the bad stuff. But like I said, we have to hold those people accountable. But it was more times like that when, those stereotypes were broken.
Okay, so this idea is like really interesting, and the question that you asked to everybody is a hard question to ask. So how and what inspired you to get this idea?
The 2016 election. Basically, at the beginning, you see that newsreel, all those news clips, and I was just hearing a whole lot about the country, a whole lot, and this was the first election I was going to be able to vote, and things like that, and I was just, it was to the point where I wanted to self-inform about this country I heard so much about, and I heard so many polarizing views, and like I said, I heard so much about the bad. I wanted to see like what was really out there, and so I decided to drive it, and I was like, I want to know what does it mean to be American, because you have one side saying one thing, another side saying the other thing. So that's where I got the idea, and then the inspiration to actually do it. I watched this Werner Herzog documentary called Lo and Behold, and I just really liked the formatting of it and stuff, and I was like, I think I can take that and then take this idea and put them together, and so that's where that really came from.
From the other countries you have seen, has there been like a greater national pride there than in America?
Negative. Usually what it is that they are very proud of their culture, but not necessarily their country. So, yeah, I found people very critical of their governments and the way things were run and such, but they loved what helped them to being, let's say, a Spaniard or being Italian, which were, their traditions, their food, their parties, stuff like that. So, whereas in the US, I feel like we're very proud of a lot of other aspects that other countries aren't. Like, we're very proud of our election process and of our democratic society and of aspects of our government. So, I think that's the biggest difference between the way our perspectives are different than other countries of their own countries.
So, you think that maybe the media is pitting us against one another for ratings instead of really going out there and seeing the good of what America is?
100%. I think that, I hate to say it, more people want to watch bad stuff than good stuff.
It's more immediately, you feel it. You see someone save a cat from a tree, and you're like, but you see someone that you identify with as an American being harassed or something happening, and it's immediate.
Yeah, then 100%. Yeah, I think a lot of it is the media. We have a really good country. It's hard to see sometimes.
In your interviews with
Yeah, so we interviewed an Air Force member, an airman, and he actually was one of like the least patriotic, but I think it's because he was in the military very much because of the benefits the military supplied. So he got his education. He was ready to get out. He really kind of used it for his own benefits, and then I think when we interviewed him, he was getting out in 6 months. And he was ready to move on from it, and he was like, yeah, now I have the money to get my degree, and blah, 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 so like I'm ready. And so I think he abused the system a bit, and I think that's actually the only service member that we interviewed, unfortunately. But yeah, so no, I guess is the answer.
But did you find that to abuse the system, or almost it's a two-way street?
So it is a two-way street. At the end of the day, he's out there putting himself on the line, and those people deserve so much. And I mean, no one says it's a requirement to want to go die for your flag, right? But yeah, I think it is a two-way street. He's putting a lot out there for our country in the first place. So.
He met the requirements of his contract.
Correct. I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah, they should have held to a higher standard that, do your job, get what you need out of it, and by the way, you that.
Correct.
Since you were traveling during the summer right before the elections, and the elections were really heating up at the time that you were out there, did you feel it? Was that a topic of discussion? Did that come up often during your trips and your interviews?
So I never wanted to force it, since it was so prevalent. So a lot of what I would do is ask it more like, so what do you think about the current political situation? Or what do you think about the current political climate? And most people would scoff, just laugh, or like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Or some people would get really serious and be like, this is dividing our country, this is extremely polarizing. And the most surprising part is looking back and seeing all these people predict where our country was heading, and that's exactly where it went. It just became more polarized, more two-sided, more like, more divided, really. And most people talk about the leadership. Most people went into the leadership and said, we need someone that's going to bring us together and not split us apart. Yeah, so it's almost like a little scary looking at how accurate a lot of what people said was, because at the end of the day, it was very readable. When you look at that on TV, it's easy to see that this is not good, this is not positive for our country. So, yeah, I'd say mostly that's how it came up. Nobody really mentioned names, no one picked sides. I think because it is polarizing, but yeah, it was very, very much just like nobody was enjoying it, I would say. 100%, no one was enjoying it.
So you said previously that when you experienced when you traveled outside of the country and met with people from Italy, Spain, and so forth, they're very proud because of the culture, the customs, the traditions. Did you find anything like that here? In your questioning, was it all based on politics, or did you ask other random questions to just find out if they identified themselves as Americans based on other factors except a political view?
So a really good one is Albuquerque. We met with a Chicano man. And being Chicano is the part of the country that was originally Mexico before we took all that land. So literally the border just went like that. So all of a sudden, all these people who were Mexican are now American because they're in the States. So it's this tight group that really clings to those original origins of being Mexican in this really northern portion of Mexico. So he actually identifies as Chicano. And yeah, I would say a lot of people actually, like I said, I tried not to go too much into politics, and I wanted to know how they identified as that. And so a lot of people really identified with the cultures that brought them there, whether it be, like I said, the cantor from the synagogue, it was the music, and that's why she was in Nashville, and that's what she identified as, was being, this musician in this beautiful place, this also a very diverse place, and a city that was growing at the time. And then, so people more identified with what brought them to that space, or to that area, and then with that area in particular. It wasn't like, oh yeah, this great country, it was more like, yeah, I live in a great area. So.
when you would like ask people like what's their American identity, or what would be like a common answer you would get?
A lot of people didn't know how to answer it because I think that's a pretty tough question and it carries a lot of different things with it. So, I mean, one guy was like, it's beer and football on Sundays. You know what I mean? Like, and that is very much what it could be for him. It's like that's what he feels is his American identity is when he gets to chill, drink a beer, and watch a football game. You know, but then some people would go much more in depth and be like, well, I think it's the fact that we have these freedoms and you know that I get to live my life the way I want and stuff. I know that in Chicago they interviewed 2 witches. Said they were Wiccan was their religion, and they said that in a lot of other countries they would get killed for that. So very much being American for them was having that religious freedom, even if it is this pagan practice, as you might call it. So the answers varied completely across the board. I would say a lot of it came back to the freedoms, to the ability to be who you choose, and that is very much embedded in the American identity.
So after you took this trip and collected all of your information, which is an amazing perspective, you go to Europe. Did you ever ask what anybody that you met there, what their idea was of the American identity? Just for fun?
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that I don't even have to ask half the time. You know, they want to tell me.
The first thing she said, one of the biggest questions we got a lot would be sitting at a table, in Greece, and we'd talk to the table next to us, and they'd tell us a few things about Greek culture, and we'd be like, oh, we're excited to be here. And then one of them would like cheekily smile at his friends and be like, so, what do you think of Donald Trump? And it's always a very loaded question, right? What can we say without it being wrong or right? There's nowhere we can really go with that. Like we could do what we think you're implying, and we can agree with you. And be like, oh, we don't like him for whatever reason. We could also go against what you say, and then you would judge us immediately. So it was a very interesting question, but it was funny that it was on everyone's minds.
I'm sure.
Every country we stopped in, it was asked at least 3 or 4 times.
What was their reaction to what was happening in this country?
They were scared like we were.
Yeah, because, for example, in Italy, I remember once I visited, and this was a while ago now, but and Obama was on the TV. When was the last time you saw the Italian president on our TV? Right? And it's like that our politics play so much into just what's happening around the world that half the time they know more about it than us. Half of the time they're like, oh, did you hear about this decision and da 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 da, and we're just like, no, like I hate to say it, we play like kind of the dull American in the sense that like we aren't that informed, and yeah, so like a lot of it is that they usually end up knowing more than us, and they're actively involved because it's impacting their country very greatly.
We have time for like one last question, and we have to wrap up. So, Pop, your hand did a little thing there.
Okay. Switching to the mechanics of putting the film together. Right? Other than Mom and Pop asking you when are you going to finish the film, what has been the most challenging part for you in addressing the question through your art?
Deciding how to place things and where. Because a lot of it is sit-down interviews, and getting a flow to it and more of a beginning and end is definitely the hardest part, because how do we connect them? How do we bridge those ties between cities? So, and then how do we even start that, right? So that's definitely been the most difficult part, is just finding the actual structure of the film. And then also, since it's such a variance of opinions, how do we end on a single note? Or how do we leave the audience with at least one general idea from the entire film? That's definitely the hardest part, is like, yeah, trying to structure it so that it has a beginning, middle, end, and then it says something, rather than just saying everything, because otherwise you walk out of the theater like, what the hell did I just watch, right? So that's definitely been the most difficult part.
I just wanted to, I don't know if we have time for one more question. Is that okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Did you find the glue?
Working on it.
Okay.
Working on it. Stir in the pot.
Well, just one of the things I wanted to say to wrap it up was, in the beginning of the trailer, Diego asks the question, are you a patriot? Am I a patriot? And I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that the desire to self-inform to an extent, to travel 78 days in a Ford Expedition with 3 other dudes, one of them being 6'10". So not a lot of space in the car. To do that, to search for that question, to continue asking that question, am I a patriot? What does that mean? That's to me, that was fascinating. But it's also what we're trying to do with this film. It's just have people ask questions. That desire to inform, that need to be informed, to question, to educate yourself is super important. And Diego once said to me after the film, he was like, what I learned a lot is I can never tell anyone what to do, ever. I can't. It's just impossible. Everyone has their own opinion. Everyone has their own way of living, their own ideas. You can never tell anyone anything. But we can show them something and allow them to extrapolate their own ideas and opinions from what we show them. And I think that's why art is important. That's why what we did, or really what Diego did, was important. And why we feel this film is so important, because of that. We can't tell anyone what to do, but we can always just show and have them get their own ideas. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Alberto and Diego. I'm very happy to be for you guys to be part of Indie Pasion, and I hope we get choose to unveil that documental soon. Okay. Okay. We're going to have right after a series documental. There are 4 great documentals also.